It's a real pleasure to be here, and this is my third Parari. I've been at the Explosive Safety Board now for 15 years. So I have a little bit of a perspective, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I was really happy to hear that the topic this session was really on supporting the warfighter, because as a former Marine, everything is about supporting the warfighter. All the R&D, all the policy, all the evaluations, if it is not supporting the warfighter directly, it has no meaning. It's a science project. And close to my face, okay, got it. Sorry, I need to get remedial mic training after. Okay, so what am I going to talk to you about? First of all, the strategic imperative. This administration has been very good in providing a strategic template for us to follow, what is important, and nothing is more important than supporting our armed forces, but supporting the commander specifically, because the commander has the responsibility, the imperative to execute the mission. And so we're advisors, that's it. We're advisors, and the advice can be taken or not, but that is our goal in life. So build a more lethal force, strengthen alliances and attract new partners, reform the department for greater performance and affordability. Fundamentally, explosive safety touches all of these strategic imperatives. So this is, the reason I put this up is we have had a series of secretaries of defense, starting with General Mattis, and now Dr. Mark Esper. And the good part is the national security strategy and national defense strategy have stayed consistent because it is a sound approach to doing business. And these are the three fundamental aspects which are extremely important. All right, so one of the things that really I find challenging in the senior ranks of the administration that I deal with, not always the senior people, but immediately when we talk explosive safety, the topic of storage comes up. A lot of people think that explosive safety is strictly storage, which is a problem because it's everything from R&D through the requirements, through the manufacturing, the transportation, the classification, the maintenance, the inspection, the handling, the buildup, the demilitarization, and finally, going back to start. So what is explosive safety? People, processes, and supporting infrastructure. Am I not complying again?
This one will go over you.
Will it?
There you go. Try that.
Okay, God. I still need that one.
Still need that one.
Oh my God. Next I'm gonna have is, I don't talk to this one. Better? Where's my oxygen bottle and my IV? Okay, and then the cigarette to go with it, right? Okay, so people. Who does the business? It's a people business. We are in the people business. If we can't communicate our goals and objectives and how we're going to support the strategy, we have no value. What are the processes that involve munitions? Just talked about a couple of them. The requirements determination, whether it's the manufacturing, the R&D that we talked about earlier in the previous keynote. And then the buildup, the protective construction designs, all of it are people business with technical aspects. And then the infrastructure. Can't talk enough about supporting infrastructure because without it, you got no place to do your business. So these are the things that we've come up with to define what explosive safety is: people, processes, and infrastructure. Okay. That's basically what this says, is a little bit more words about what those processes are. Oh, wow. Okay, it's not really a keynote or a presentation without a mission and a vision slide. So what do? We improve operational effectiveness and reduce munitions-related risks to people, infrastructure, and the environment through the munitions life cycle, logistics, and infrastructure sustainment processes. What's important about that? It's multidisciplinary. We have right now, we're good at talking to our own selves, talking to ourselves in the mirror. It's a refined art that we have all mastered the skill. But talking to the people in the logistics section, the master planners, the infrastructure sustainment and maintainers, it's a different animal altogether, different set of challenges. And if we don't integrate into those practices, the infrastructure crumbles. We're facing a lot of World War II vintage infrastructure issues now that we are having to recapitalize, and communicating the necessity to recapitalize it is a big challenge. What's our vision? Explosive Safety and Munitions Risk Management Program integrated across the Department of Defense enterprise that optimizes military capability, reduces risk whenever possible, and provides information to support the commander's risk decision when risks remain. We don't make decisions, we're advisors. We come up with policy. Policy can always be what? Ignored, fundamentally, if chosen by the commander, at their own discretion. But fundamentally, we're advisors. Okay, the Department of Defense Explosive Safety Board, we're congressionally mandated, and we were created in 1928. 1949, the National Security Act put together the Department of Defense, and so we changed names. But we're almost 100 years old at our origin. So what are our core functions? What do we do day in and day out? Obviously, we are governors. We have rules and regulations that we maintain. US, NATO, we partner with other multinational organizations as well. We hazard classify. The services come together and they look at new or modified munitions and they come up with recommendations to what the hazard should be. This is not a unilateral process. It is heavily influenced and directed at the services as it should be, but ultimately I sign the hazard classification on behalf of the United States Department of Defense. Licensing, site plans. All the conditions that are relevant to an operation involving munitions, it's really a risk decision document. If it meets our requirements, I sign it on behalf of the Secretary of Defense. Any idea how many of these we do a year? Audience interaction. Come on. Hundreds. Yeah, we're in the right order of magnitude. We've narrowed it down. It's about 600 a year. Oh, since we're on this topic of audience participation, the Air Marshal mentioned Halifax, right? So what is Halifax known for today? It's one of the leading centers in the world for the blind. Why? Because of the accident. People that were out of the initial range of devastation were watching the accident from tops of hills. So the blast overpressure did what to the glass? And so there's a tremendous amount of eye injuries as a result of that Halifax explosion. And so it became, over time, a center of expertise and excellence for eyesight. So out of a truly devastating accident, some good came out of it. Okay, so back to our core functions. Licensing, very important, but ultimately, if you meet the requirement, the risk is at its lowest, but can you always in operations meet the requirement of explosive safety? And is those in the forefront of your consideration as the operator? Absolutely not. So one of our most important aspects, a new line of business, if you will, that we've added in the past 10 years or so is operational support, and I'm going to talk more about that and what it really means. And finally, programmatic evaluation. We are, at the end of the day, responsible for maintaining the Department of Defense program to make sure that, in general, the services have effective explosive safety programs. And that has transitioned as well in the past 10 years from a black hat, you wake up in the morning, you think how you're going to mess up explosive safety. Well, we know people don't do that. Okay, it's usually resource driven, and fundamentally, our evaluations now are geared to giving the services tools for how to address the resource challenges they face. So a change in perspective. It's not a brief without an org chart. So fundamentally, we have 4 divisions within the Explosive Safety Board. And, oops, this is not who, all right. So, first division, business, finance, personnel, general admin, information technology. This is the division that handles the development and maintenance of policy, knowledge management development, as well as technical support. Hazard classification starts here, as well as the strategic partnering. The R&D we have program managers, and the R&D programs are managed in this division. Program evaluation division, obviously the evaluations, as well as the site planning and oversight and the response, munitions response and risk stewardship. And finally, I've got 4 military officers, 1 from each service, representing their service and also participating in the daily activities. We have a voting board which comes together twice a year to vote on proposed changes to the technical standards. And then, so this group is about 30 people at the Department of Defense level. Faces with titles. This gentleman is retiring at the end of this month. He's going away, and he's a retired 2-star Air Force general, and he's leaving, and I am not. So his farewell speech was, we've increased the workload, we've reduced civil personnel by 40%, and the workload's not getting any easier, and you're not getting a raise. He said that. So yeah, that's the reality of the situation. Austere conditions. Biggest budgets we've ever had, but the most significant cuts as well. So where does that mean the money's going? Systems, weapons, the whole 9 yards. So hopefully this is as far as it'll go, because it is a significant challenge in terms of sustainment. Okay, so what are our primary goals? Reduce related risks in the Department of Defense through an effective program, obviously mom and apple pie. Integrate risk management into the munitions life cycle, logistics, infrastructure planning, and broader Department of Defense acquisition programs. If we are not considered, if explosive safety tenets and requirements are not integrated from the start, what's the end result? It is always a deviation or a waiver. And fundamentally, a higher level of risk is accepted, whether it's tacitly or explicitly. It's not always communicated. So if you don't plan for it from the beginning, you're making a mistake. And I'm preaching to the audience, to the choir here, I realize that. But fundamentally, this is not a nice to do, this is a must do, because, as I'm going to show from our Korean experience, it truly has operational impact and value. If improving explosive safety criteria and analytical tools, one example, our criteria is based on what? Mass detonating, large-scale events, typically associated with bulk explosives. That's what all our quantity distance tables are usually built on. So Dr. Fuchs and I were talking earlier, the fire has a big role in how energetics react. And most of the accidents now are not mass detonating large-scale events. Our policy and our regulations have done a very good job reducing and eliminating those altogether. Where do our accidents happen? Small scale, manufacturing, one-offs, propellant instability, not so much in our nation, but other nations that we see accidents. So what do we need to understand better? The physics associated with fire-initiated events. So that's where we're going to go in terms of technology, in terms of R&D, is we're going to drive some of that, because the accidents are smaller, but what happens to the price, the cost operationally of one THAAD missile going up? Well, that's a big problem, okay? All our weapons now, not all, but our high-stake weapons, low-density, high-demand weapons, precision-guided weapons, if you lose those, you punch a hole in it, you got a problem. So that's what we're seeking to go, is to stay current with where the technology is in terms of weapons, to be relevant, because without being relevant, we have no place. Support commanders in their assessment of munitions-related risks, and increase munitions-related interoperability with partner nations. So both of these I'm going to talk to, without saying a word, I'm going to show you a couple videos. They're short videos, because honestly, I figured when I talk to people about explosive safety, not in the community, it takes me 5 separate events to explain to them what risk management is and how it truly works. So these videos, I wrote the scripts and said we need to make videos, and then here's where we are. So now, let's see if I can navigate. It's like the steering over here. The mouse is backwards from...
The outcome of today's mortar attack is that the magazine with the munitions exploded, along with all of its contents. This triggered the sympathetic detonation of all other magazines. There are a reported 37 fatalities, 77 injuries, and a loss of 2 aircraft, 5 UAV, 3 UH-60s, 90% of munitions in the ASP, and all munitions-related infrastructure, above-ground magazines, and inspection and maintenance buildings. The fuel farm and runway were also destroyed, and catastrophic damage is reported at the HQ and the living areas, flight line, and apron. There are millions of dollars in total infrastructure and equipment damages, and a total loss of capability to perform the combatant commander's counterterrorism mission in the AOR. This attack places the entire FOB at risk for a follow-on ground assault. It's recommended you make an emergency Class 5 resupply to allow security forces to repel a follow-on attack. Strategically, redirecting high-demand, low-density munitions to FOB Raptor is likely to cause a theater-wide munition supply knock-on effect to ongoing and planned operations for 6 months. Although the FOB was initially laid out and licensed to meet DoD and NATO explosive safety requirements, when the counterterrorism mission was expanded, the influx of new U.S. units, weapon systems, allies, and increased infrastructure and munitions requirements led to construction that was no longer being cited or assessed for risk. Although this construction took place before the current FOB commander took command, DoD and NATO explosive safety and munitions risk management requirements were not followed. This situation could have been avoided had the FOB commander and his staff been aware of DoD and NATO ESMRM requirements. Although the FOB was initially laid out and licensed to meet DoD and NATO explosive safety requirements, when the counterterrorism mission was expanded, we had to increase the type and quantity of munitions on the FOB. The initial plan was to store munitions in an above-ground storage magazine here. However, after conducting an ESMRM assessment, multiple ESQD violations were found. Its proximity to the fuel farm and other FOB infrastructure, as well as to other magazines, would put the entire base at risk. Thankfully, additional barriers were put in place, and a second location was identified here that significantly reduced the potential level of risk. And this is where today's explosion occurred. There were 2 fatalities and 3 injuries reported. The 20-foot mill van used to store grenades, mortars, and small arms was lost, but there was no loss of UAVs or tactical vehicles. Had the FOB commander and his staff not acted on the ESMRM assessment, it could be said with certainty the losses would have been greater. The entire FOB could have been destroyed, or pretty close to it.
Although it is a real tragedy to lose anyone in times of conflict or otherwise, I appreciate the FOB commander and his staff's efforts to protect as many as possible by integrating the explosive safety munitions risk management process into their facilities planning and operations.
We deal with a lot of people. A lot of people have stakes and input in the explosive safety progress, whether it's energetic development, weapon system development. All these agencies we have relations with. And obviously we've been partners with Australia for quite some time, and it's a partnership that is developing and has come a long way. So I appreciate everything we've done over the past 15, 20 years together. All right, so regulations, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. What I'd really like to focus on next is really our challenges. As I mentioned, our infrastructure is aging, and so how we deal with that going forward is a big push, because infrastructure, high dollar, and what kind of risk does that pose to a commander who has immediate issues that he's got to deal with? Not a very high risk. It's not sexy. It's not immediate. It's like blood pressure medicine. You don't take it right away, you may not see the adverse consequences, but if you don't take it over time, then you have the problems. Our infrastructure doesn't meet necessarily our ability to support new weapons. The doors don't always fit, the criteria is not always accurate. So a big push from us is to bring to light the fact that we need to update our infrastructure. Existential reasons, do we need to exist? Our organization, you might have heard of something called the Night Court. It's a process done by the highest levels within the Department of Defense to question pretty much every agency and their need to exist. We've gone through it, and I think the outcomes are good, because it'd be kind of a shame to see the 100 years go by the wayside and delegate it down to the services, because there needs to be an oversight agency. So we are facing all sorts of pressures to make sure that our mission is accurate. And it's not a bad thing, because if you can't explain why you do it accurately and succinctly to those that matter, then you really probably should relook at how you're doing business. So it's been a good exercise, although not entirely easy by any stretch of the imagination. So just going to leave it at this for the rest of the time. People is always a challenge, because why? I mean, there's only a certain amount of folks out there to do what we do, and coming to the Department of Defense Explosive Safety Board is like an appointment to the Supreme Court. People generally don't leave or take other jobs because there's nowhere else for them to go in defense in terms of grade and seniority. So getting new people in is always a challenge. And it's, so the question was asked earlier, and how do we respond to that? The labs have access potentially to universities and new blood that way. We don't necessarily have that, because you have to have some sort of experience with the military or engineering processes or scientific. So our challenges are, I usually get people from the services with experience that want to be promoted. So we've got to keep feeding that pipeline. The engineers and the scientists have to go down to the university level and convince them that this is a good line of work to be in. So it's a big challenge, no question about it. People are always our biggest asset and our biggest challenge. What else is a challenge? The acquisition process. We are in what's called getting things out, as was mentioned in the previous keynote. Getting things out quickly is a big push of this administration, and rightly so. For example, the space program has a tremendous push. How does that affect explosive safety? Well, for example, the TNT equivalence is used to measure energetic contribution, right? So where do our rocket motors typically come from in the past? It's not a rhetorical question. Where do they come from? Sorry? Right, but who would make our US rocket motors? Russia, okay? So we had kerosene-driven rocket motors. Well, Congress said, no mas, no more, you gotta build your own. So Amazon and also Tesla, SpaceX, were competing, and they're using different formulations. Whereas the energetic contribution of a kerosene-based motor was a 0.3, where TNT is 1, we suspect that these new formulations are 1 point something. But that has to be part of the test plan, right? Has to be part of the acquisition documents. But guess what? These are in rapid acquisition development. So what's happening to the test plans? Oh, there are none. Ooh, that's a problem. So what happens if these things have unintended events? It could potentially destroy the supporting infrastructure or the space launch program wherever they're being launched. So we're having to keep pace and interject ourselves without slowing down the program, but saying these things have to be considered. So keeping up with technology is a big push of ours, to stay current, to support the mission, not to derail it. And that's going to be my final point. I could talk problems all day, but what I want to leave you with is, in addition to being a former Marine, I'm an eternal optimist. So by communicating and reaching out, we enhance operational effectiveness. We give the commanders options. We don't take away their choices. We identify the risks. We give them options and alternatives based on those risks. So that's been the shift of the organization since I took over. Is we're not black hat. We are enablers. And the work we've done in Korea to reduce and eliminate risk dating back to the armistice, where it was thought that you could not site explosive safety locations, we've reduced risk 99% and increased operational capability by 29 million pounds of NEW. So what was thought to be an intractable problem is now a strategic solution through identifying solutions and working together. The risk management process has given those alternatives. So you license when you can, obviously. You do risk assessments for commanders' decisions when you can't. And part of that is identification of analysis of alternatives. So it gives the commander options. And it's increased operational capability. So explosive safety is really direct support of our national strategic plan, as well as the warfighter. And on that note, I'm going to show you one last video about ports and what it means. Oh, before I get to that, the last video, the Forward Operating Base. How many of you seen the YouTube video on Forward Operating Base Falcon? If you haven't, you need to see it, because this video pales in comparison to the reality of what sympathetic detonations really do. And you have the soldiers watching and filming, and then you hear pop, and you see it, the flashes, the pop, 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 and then it gets very interesting, because then it goes near sympathetic. It increases in intensity, and you can hear it in the voices of the people filming that it is a true issue. It is harrowing. So I encourage you to watch YouTube Forward Operating Base Falcon. It's about a 20-minute video, and it's worth your time, because that communicates pretty clearly what the impacts of not doing this correctly are. Again, the port video is based on real scenarios. Oh, not that one. The folder, yes. Thanks. Yes, thank you.
What's going on? Those containers need to be on the ground 20 minutes ago. Alright. Sorry, right away.
Offload was in support of a multinational NATO exercise called Golden Zebra. We're now getting reports of 562 people killed and over 2,300 injured. The government.
Philip speaking.
Sir, are you seeing this?
Yeah. What happened?
Apparently this guy drove the forklift into one of the containers. He shouldn't have been operating the lift at all. Turns out he had his license revoked a few months ago after an on-the-job incident.
Thankfully he wasn't one of our guys.
Actually, sir, it's looking like you could be held accountable for this.
What do you mean? He was a port employee.
Yes, but because the port didn't have a license specifically for handling munitions, you needed to sign off on a risk assessment to satisfy NATO and DoD requirements.
Wow, I thought the host nation would be the one responsible. Is there anything else the risk assessment would have uncovered?
Well, yes, sir. As you may remember, we were already facing substantial risks, with this port being the area's primary oil terminal. Ideally, an alternative port would have been chosen. We had no other options, but the assessment would have shown we could reduce risk by offloading at the furthest pier, away from the holding tanks. To further reduce risks, the offloading could have been scheduled at night, when fewer people were around. And there's no reason the containers needed to be set in a staging area at all. In fact, they should have been loaded one by one directly onto the trucks. Accumulation of large quantities of munitions at the dock should not have been permitted. Sir, anytime munitions are transported, maintained, stored, or demilitarized during training exercises and operations, they always have to have either a license by the DoD or a host nation. When that's not possible, a thorough risk assessment must be completed and a risk decision made by the commander or his delegate.
Understood. This was a terrible oversight on my part. Performing that assessment clearly would have led to a different outcome. Let me begin by saying well done all the way around. Golden Zebra at Amberley was a success. We demonstrated our ability to support contingency plans, both from a logistics perspective as well as operationally.
Yes, sir. The risk assessment you signed helped us identify and mitigate some risks that could have caused some serious problems. And preparing that assessment meant we validated DoD Joint Chiefs and NATO requirements.
Glad to hear it. And of course, I'm always thankful to see the operation was conducted safely and that there were no accidents or incidents. Well done to all.
I'm just going to leave it here. So in conclusion, from the R&D process all the way up to the operation, either a license is generated or an exemption that goes up for commander's risk decision. These are operationally sustainable actions, and it's risk management. It enhances the mission and gives us more capability than we would have had otherwise. So it identifies and reduces risks, and it ultimately supports the warfighter. So with that, are there any questions?
Do you ever think we'll be in a position to say that that EO infrastructure can be inherently safe, as opposed to putting a lot of time and effort into simply mitigating away risk?
That's a great question, and fundamentally that's our vision. Whether it becomes a reality, I think it's an incremental gain, because it's, as we talked about earlier, it's all about the resources. Because you can design the most safe weapon ever, most safe infrastructure, but at what cost and at what trade-offs? And this is a key point. Explosive safety is in the trade space. Ultimately, in the weapons process, the program manager decides what to trade off. So our job, being in the people business, is to communicate that effectively. So it falls back on us as to how effective we are to getting toward that. So it's not an easy, I would like that, but at what cost, which may take away from mission capability. So it's really trade-off, and we've got to find that sweet spot. So I hope it's a gray answer, I know, but there's no right or wrong. Can we do better? Absolutely. That's why I've not left in 15 years, because I feel passionate and compassionate about the trade-offs that we have to have in this industry. It's not easy. Thank you. Great question.
Thank you.
My question is there a modeling technology you guys use, or a simulation program that you use to construct your bases that is also something available outside the US, for example?
Let me see if I understand the question. Is there modeling for what specifically? For infrastructure?
For example, is there a base planning, an integrated base planning program, like software that you guys use?
We do when you saw on the first video, the ARCs, the risk assessment ARCs, yes, we do have software for that, and we've shared that with our partners on how to do the risk assessments, and that casts the ARCs. And we're also working to improve our other algorithms throughout, because as I mentioned, a lot of them are driven by old quantity distance engines. So we're constantly improving the analytics, but there are some software models that I've shared and certainly am willing to share, and we've developed them for NATO as well. So yes, thank you. And the work is never ending.
It seemed like that your effects were, your videos really focused on mitigation of the effects as opposed to preventing the issue in the first place. So their answer was to like move the ordinance for the helicopter at night, with no second guy spotting and things like that. So I'm wondering, what is your role at DDESB as far as looking at the processes themselves in order to prevent the issues from occurring in the first place?
These two events that were videos, the point is, the first one was when you license, and then the reality of the situation is locations are fluid and dynamic, and those situations change. So whenever we get a site plan, we look at the processes soup to nuts. That's really the gold level. If someone submits a site plan, we have much better control. The risk assessment is when it's truly a dynamic status, and you try and get in there and identify ways to reduce that risk as much as possible. So the short answer is, spent 6 years working the Korean solution, so we're in it on the ground, identifying process from the word go. So both processes get in and work the solution as much as possible. But however, when you have hundreds of thousands of people moving in around the ammunition depots, there's certain things you really can't do other than reducing the amount of ammunition. So we're in it from the start when our services are requested. So that's the thing, is educating the command about what we do, and we also train and educate the services with us, so they carry the mission forward. So it's a constant training and education piece and communication piece, which is absolutely vital to understanding the root causes and eliminating those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thanks, Thierry, for participating in Parari in 2019. It's been a mainstay. He always provides, up-to-date and contemporary examples, and also what's going on in his side of the world. Thanks very much for participation on DDESB and 12. More importantly, the focus today, and also some of the challenges which relate to some of the opportunities in the group. But also, at the end of the day, as you often say, it's about supporting the warfighter command on the ground to make informed decisions when they're talking about the issue risk, but also, as you rightly said, the right option. And I think those two videos really reinforce that fact. So thanks once again for coming down and talking about appreciation.